This is an interview with J. Krishnamurti by Francis Watson in London, 1966.
The famous philosopher and educator last summer paid one of his periodical visits to England. While he was in London, he agreed to be interviewed by Francis Watson, and in order to record the interview, visited a broadcasting studio for the first time. Francis Watson introduces the program.
Jiddu Krishnamurti is in his 71st year. When I first met him, he was 44. His hair may be greyer now, his fine-boned face more lined, and this time in London we didn't play basketball as we had in South India 27 years ago. But he wears well, although in his case perhaps such an observation is irrelevant. For surely a quality of being doesn't have a life cycle. The present is all. And yet Krishnamurti's past is one which breaks even the most bizarre conventions of biography. When he was 14, Krishnamurti and his younger brother Nityananda used to roam the beaches of Madras, where his father, an impoverished Brahmin, had found a minor job at the headquarters of the Theosophical Society. This was at Adyar, at the edge of the sea. The Society's president was the amazing Dr. Annie Besant, who had shocked Bernard Shaw by her conversion to Theosophy, but had then forced him to confess that he had met his match. When Krishnamurti was brought to her attention and adopted by her with his brother on their father's consent, she had, in a sense, met her match. What she thought she had met was the herald, if not the very vehicle, of the expected return of the great world teacher. Already at 16, she made him the head of her new Order of the Star, founded to prepare for the supreme event. This alarmed the orthodox father of the two boys so much that he tried to get them back. There was a sensational lawsuit. Mrs. Besant had to fight right up to the Privy Council before she could secure her guardianship of the precious vessel. Then, when he spoke at Adyar on December the 28th, 1925, in the presence of some 6,000 people, she declared that there rang out a voice not heard on earth for 2,000 years. Mrs. Besant's convictions were absolute, and during the next few years they came to be shared by large numbers of people throughout the world, in 50 national organizations with revenues, property, and influence. The Society owned a castle and 5,000 acres at Ommen in Holland, and a fertile Californian valley for the pilot scheme of a new civilization. But in California, Krishnamurti watched his dearly loved brother dying, and out of his grief came an inner experience which not only inspired his teaching, but at the same time raised doubts about his messianic mission. The weight of expectation, the pressure to reveal himself and assume authority must have been enormous. The date for it was advanced. The scene was set at Ommen, and in 1929 the moment came. Krishnamurti stood up before a vast audience, and in a memorable announcement dissolved the Order of the Star, rejected its worldwide organization, and renounced the role so elaborately prepared for him over 20 years. I desire those who seek to understand me, he said, to be free. Truth is a pathless land, and you cannot approach it by any path whatsoever, by any religion, by any sect. The sequel was at least as remarkable as the event itself. Free of the burden, a teacher did indeed appear. Discarding the worldwide organization, Krishnamurti continues to talk to groups and meetings and individuals in India, Australia, North and South America, and Europe, with no kind of publicity. His recent visit to Broadcasting House, for instance, was the first time he had ever been in a radio or television studio. He passes like night from land to land, But there the comparison with the ancient mariner ends, since he is the least importunate of men. As for theosophy, though its doctrines are still advertised and expounded, it never recovered as a movement from the blow delivered at Oman in 1929. But here's another notable thing. The personal relations of Annie Besant with the Messiah who seemed to have failed her remained affectionate and trustful until her death. At her request, he even retained one specific function, as a kind of advisor and visitor for the two schools that she had established in India. It was in the neighborhood of one of these schools that I first met Krishnamurti and first heard him speak, morning after bright morning, in the shade of an enormous tree. It was a place of natural beauty, and it was also the place where Krishnamurti had been born. And one of the things I wanted to know, talking to him recently in the studio, was whether he in any way still considered himself an Indian.
I've got an Indian passport. I'm described as an Indian. But I'm not an Indian because I don't believe in nationality. I believe nationalities are poison. They separate man, they divide man into Indian, Russian, American, all the rest of it, and which only breeds more antagonism, more hatreds, more divisions. The earth is divided into nationalities, into flags. I think all that is childish, immature. I think it is the desire to identify oneself with something larger. I mean, one wants to identify oneself with so-called God. Then if you can't do that, at least you can identify yourself with your country and all that kind of stuff. So I think this desire to identify oneself with something greater than with oneself is probably inherent in man. Not inherent, is always there. And so people are exploited that way.
Well, now this must be 40 years or so that you have been talking and listening to people.
41 years.
It has never struck you to change your way of existence at all?
Not at all. No, I won't. No.
Usually, if people feel strongly that they have something to convey which will enable people to live better or to change their way of life, the first necessity is always to have a large organization and to publicize it. Now, have you got that?
No. On the contrary, I think propaganda becomes a dreadful thing. It becomes a lie perpetuated. You can't do that.
Well then, how, I think this must have been a question which arose at the beginning, let us say 40 years ago. How does it work? How is it that you're able to find audiences, and how do you communicate?
You see, there was a very large organization at one time 40 years ago, and I was more or less the head of it. There was large property and, you know, the whole works that go with organizations. It was formed really by Dr. Besant, and I was the head of it because it was, she believed, and it was a very sincere, deep, abiding, honest belief that a world teacher would come and he would occupy this body, and the whole thing was prepared for that event. And when I began to talk and gone into it, I said, no organization, doesn't matter whether it is 10,000 years old or recent, can lead man to truth. On the contrary, they are a hindrance. And being a hindrance, a man who is really very serious wants to go into, find out and inquire, it blocks him. It conditions him. So we dissolved the whole thing, returned the properties and the whole of that. And since then, friends have asked me to come different parts of the world. They pay for my ticket or put me up. I don't personally handle money. They buy the ticket, a return ticket. I occasionally go to the consulate to get the visas.
You are happier that way?
Not happy or unhappy. When I have to do it, I do it. When I'm not, it's all right.
In abandoning or dissolving the organization, you hoped, did you, to be able to continue to teach?
No, I wasn't really, didn't think about the future at all. I said this is an organization of this kind impedes man, and therefore we dissolved the order, gave all the properties away. There was vast property, money, everything was given away, and we'll see what happens in the future. We never calculated what will happen. I think that's the only way. That's real, that's the only way to do, not with a motive.
Well, now looking back on this period in between, do you think that the fact that there had been such an organization beforehand helps now to provide you with people in countries who invite you?
Not at all. Because now I've traveled so much, I've been all over the world except in Russia and China and those parts. They know more or less what I'm talking about.
I wonder whether the expectation may be a little different in some countries. For instance, in India, there is always, after all, the great virtue of meeting a celebrated man, a religious man.
Yes. There is that feeling that it doesn't matter, even if you don't understand what he's saying, it is good to be in his presence. You get something out of it, the perfume of it.
Do you think there's anything in that idea?
Not too much. It's like taking a drug and getting some kind of kick out of it.
So that what you have to tell people, is that then a religious message?
I should say it's religious in the sense that man cannot live always on the surface. That can never solve any of our problems.
And does this mean coming into touch with some being or some creature outside this world?
No, not at all. We have to understand existence, living. The living of our daily life with all its misery, confusion, conflict, battles. And until those are completely resolved, I don't think we can go very far. That must be the basis of further search, further examination. This is for the individual as well as for humanity. It isn't just for one person, it's for man.
So that you are then out to change society, if you can.
I hope it'll help.
But this is simply by an approach to the individual. Do you ask him to take action, or do you merely ask him to grasp certain ideas?
No, sir, I don't ask him to do a thing. It's like if you see something very clearly, you do it. You don't have to be slave to a propaganda, to a suggestion, to an influence, to authority. If you see something very clearly, then you do it or you don't do it.
So you ask them to see something?
Yes, to see. I don't even ask them, really. That sounds rather patronizing and authoritarian. But like most of us, people are so confused. Out of that confusion, they do various things which lead further confusion. But if they were aware of their own confusion and stop there, examine, and not take action out of confusion, then there is a different kind of action which comes out of clarity.
And what do you think seems to bring people to you? Do they come with specific problems, like I am unhappy, I have lost my wife or my daughter? Can you give me some assurance with much
no, sir, there is no question of assurance. Then if one can give comfort, then you might just will take a pill. A drug that will give you kind of alleviate for the moment you're suffering, and then, but that doesn't solve the problem. I don't think there is psychological security at all. One must have, obviously, physical security. But to transfer that physical security to the realm of the psyche and try to seek security in other fields is just a pursuit of a fantasy. It doesn't exist. Psychologically, I can't rely on anybody, on my wife, husband, child, country. There is no such thing as security, no such thing as permanence psychologically. But we want that. We want a God who is permanent. We want a country which is permanent, an idea which is always permanent, like tradition. One may seek security in tradition, in God, or in a family. It's the same urge to seek security, to feel safe, to feel that you cannot be shaken. And I think life won't leave you alone. You are shaken, you are disturbed. You must be disturbed. That's part of existence. But one also has to understand living. But I feel living and dying are the same. If one can find out how to live, not with all this confusion, conflict, and bitterness, anger, what's going on in the world. If one can understand all that, then death is not something in the distance. It's always close to life. Without dying, there is no living.
The clarity, is it that which, the lack of it, I should say, which causes us to fear death and to wish for continuity all the time?
So this is rather a complex question, so let us deal with its two separate things. Man is confused. We are. We have put our faith in gods, in priests, in leaders, in dictators, put our faith. They've all failed. We realize that. Any intelligent man realizes he cannot follow somebody else. And when one realizes that, one wants to examine why one follows. I don't want to do the wrong thing, so I follow. So fear is the basis of following, not clarity. The moment I am clear, then I am no authority. Clarity itself is discipline, is authority, is the guide. I don't want anything else. Now, to come to that clarity is quite an arduous task. It isn't just a word. It isn't just a symbol, an idea which I think I will cultivate. It comes through observation, through seeing, listening very clearly. I mean, seeing a tree, for example, we don't ever see the tree. We see the idea of the tree. So, if I want to see the tree very clearly, the idea, the symbol, the image, all the knowledge which has been accumulated about that particular kind of tree has to be put aside to look at that tree. So, the seeing is very important. Not only outwardly, but inwardly also, seeing myself as I actually am. My greed, my envies, my bitterness, my cynicism, my beliefs, I have to watch them. I cannot watch them if I am frightened or if I wish to change them. If I condemn them. I have to watch them. As I watch the tree, I can't change the tree. I watch it. Not that I identify myself with that tree, but then the observer and the observed, which is the tree, there is not that relationship of division. So, in the same way, if one can look at oneself without condemning, without justifying, without trying to wish it to be altered in terms of ideas and ideals, then you can look at what you are actually. So clarity comes not through a wish, a desire, an ideal, but through actual work of observation. And the actual seeing demands tremendous energy. And actual seeing is in itself discipline. So clarity comes that way. Not through cultivation, but through constant observation, which is attention.
Does this then mean that the concepts of good and evil do not finally govern what...
No, for most of us really, sir, what governs most of us is pleasure. If we realize that where there is pleasure, there is pain, pleasure called the good and evil, that which gives pain, is a corridor, endless corridor of duality we live in. And a conflict between these opposing desires. Now, and is it possible to be free of these contradictions, of these two desires pulling in different directions? I think it is.
It seems to me that one of the things which afflicts people a good deal nowadays is a feeling that faith has failed them. Now, I wonder whether really your teaching is founded on an idea of faith, or is it not rather founded on an idea of skepticism?
It's neither faith nor skepticism, but a mind that is free to examine. Because faith implies believing in something. We have believed in something for millions of years, and it hasn't changed man very much. And then the reaction to that is skepticism, bitterness, and all that, but that doesn't change either. Bring about a different mentality. So, if one... The first essential thing I feel is man must be free to examine his psychological state in relationship to society. Because he is the society. He is not something extraordinarily different from society. And so, to bring about order in society, which there is disorder now, he has to bring an order in himself as part of that society. But there's something much more beyond all that. I mean, truth, or whatever one might like to call it, isn't doing good action. That's part of it. Social reform, that's still a very small part of it, and a necessary part of it. But one must go beyond all that. Because after all, sir, man has thought, whatever he may call it, God. Doesn't matter what name one gives it. And this search for that has become an escape from actuality, from the actual daily existence.
Do you mean by that to include all the great religions, by the search for God as being an escape? Would that apply?
I would say all organized religions based on belief, dogma, authority, the savior, the somebody who will tell you what to do, give you comfort. I say all those are escapes.
Because sometimes the organization has come on top of the original voice or
Yes,
the original
that is,
teacher.
the organizations exploit man, exploit his fears.
Deliberately, do you mean?
Oh, that's partly also. It's very comforting for man to be told what to do, what to believe. I don't read literature. I don't read rather sacred books, because somehow it doesn't interest me. But Indian thought says you must cultivate, grow, reincarnation, you will be born next life, behave properly now so that you'll have better reward next life, which all is just a marketing. It's a rewarding. If you do this, you'll pay it for it better. To me, that kind of way of living seems so infantile. I do it. I do it because I love to do what I think is right, because I see it clearly. I think more and more outwardly in this progressive society, welfare society, the outward fears are going more and more. But the weight of inward fears are tremendous. Both the conscious and the unconscious fears are great. And whether man can be free of this fear. That's, if we could go into that, that's most interesting, because whether it's at all possible for man to be free from this destructive thing. I say it is possible. Totally, not partially. Totally be free of it. And to be free of it, one must know what it means to observe. I must examine. And to examine, I must be free. Free from condemnation, justification, wanting to alter what I see. Then I can look at fear. But we look at fear as though it was something outside me. That is, I am looking at fear. So there is the observer and the observed. But there is no, fear is the observer. They are two different things. So when there is this state, which is the observer is the observed, which is the observer is fear, not he is looking at fear, then the state of mind which has always looked at itself as the observer and the observed disappears. Therefore contradiction disappears. And then the fear as a fact can be looked at, and to look at a fact you need a great deal of energy. And that energy is dissipated when there is this conflict of the observer and the observed. And when there is no conflict and there is the energy to look, then fear undergoes a tremendous change. There is no fear. Both the conscious as well as the unconscious fears. Our life at present is a turmoil, is terrible mess and confusion and contradiction. And we live in that. We accept that as the norm of life. But in understanding that, in bringing about a mutation in that, which is not the act of will, but the act of clarity, the act of observation, then death is not something apart from living. Because I cannot live in that sense which we are talking about if I live in the past with my fears, with my tradition, with my culture, with my gods and all the rest of it. Living implies a cessation of conflict. Then I am living. The cessation of sorrow, then I am living. Then to live in that way, I must die also each day. If one comes to this point of living and dying, dying is living and living is dying, then there is there's beauty, there is an ecstasy in this. But you see, being afraid, we want to find out what happens after death. We're not concerned with living. If I'm concerned with living, I want to find out how to live. One's life is a battlefield, an ugly mess. And we pursue escapes, drink, women, gods.
May we keep these supports and crutches while we need them, or must we throw them all away together?
Oh, for goodness sake. Of course one must throw them away, otherwise you'll keep them forever and ever.
That was Jiddu Krishnamurti, interviewed by Francis Watson. The interview was recorded during Krishnamurti's recent visit to England.